Thank you guys for coming. Welcome into Belfast Exposed. We are here today with Donovan Wiley, having an in-conversation chat with four of the artists from the recent MFA at Ulster University. We have Jola Schaffner, Iryna Baklan, Rob Stead, and myself, Mark Bell. Come on in. You okay? So we're just going to do a quick intro of our work, and then we will have some questions from Donovan, have a bit of a conversation, and then if any of the audience members have questions after, we will take those. So we'll get started. I think the first to present is Rob.
Here we go, hold on. Done, there we go. Okay, I'm Rob Stead, and I've got a little short presentation. My project was called Well-Grubbed Old Mole, and part of it was this Vision 2020, which is actually on the wall as my exhibition pieces. Next. The project was about Brexit and my relationship with it. It captures my journey from 2016 to 2020. It tries to engage with English populism, particularly from a Laclauian perspective. He was my tutor at, say, university in the 1980s, and he thought populism was a good thing. And of course, so I've had this conversation with him, as it were, as part of my project. Vision 2020, these photographs over here, was an act of outrospection, which is the opposite to introspection. So it was me going out there and actually chatting to people and understanding where they were coming from. And it appears as a special report in this mock newspaper, which is this Well-Grubbed Old Mole, which so it appears in here as a number of pages. There's more images in here that are on the walls. Next one. So Vision 2020, as I mentioned, was an act of outrospection. And it sort of resulted from an antagonism that I felt, particularly in social media. You know, a Ramona, a prick, and so on. So I photographed 40 people over 5 weeks. I tried to tease out people's private thoughts by getting them to hold an object that represented actually their hopes or fears for the future. And in photographic terms, I hoped it would be a metaphor, a punctum, an object of intrigue as you looked at the photographs. I did a deliberate style. They're all hopefully very similar. I have the same point of view and so on. I was keen that there was a full body, which is sort of an opposite of me being defined as a Ramona, if you like. So I wanted to, in a sense, metaphorically show the full person. The journey was important to me. It was very DIY. This is the camera I used. So it was a bit of homage to people like Vivian Mayer and so on. I wanted that process. I also wanted to use film because it's unreliable, but you can get good things from it if it works. So next slide. So here's some images from Vision 2020. I sort of made up a quote. I paraphrased what they said and added my own little text below. Donovan, next slide. And there's a few there. And a few more, yep. And a few more. Good. And the newspaper is, I say, it's this one. It mimics the newspaper from the 1960s, a sort of radical left New England publication, which was actually called Old Mole. It documents my move from London to Donegal, actually as a response to the Brexit vote. So it's a story. It's a series of images that tell a story. It's based on my daily photographic journal, and also as a result of COVID restrictions. I mean, I wanted to do something slightly different, but COVID got in the way. It uses text, quotes, commentary, and mock interviews with myself. I made up a name, Rosa Lux, which is actually based on Rosa Luxemburg. And it has Brexit diary dates. So actually the dates in here, the important Brexit dates, the photograph next to it is the date is the image I use for that particular date. And next slide. So these are some images from here, from this. And as you can see, I've mimicked an Instagram style This is also a bit of a commentary on social media. This is beginning 2017. This is London. Next one. And I also included some special reports. I took lots of photographs during this period and sort of included them in this sort of made-up way by creating this newspaper, so I've included it. So there's a number of those. And then when I was based in Donegal, again because of lockdown restrictions, I continued the theme a little bit actually in Donegal. So I've got these images of people in Donegal, so they appear at the end. Some conclusions. I struggled to explain a sort of a complex relationship with Brexit, using metaphor, my preferred theories, and particularly to show the impact of social media on me and the debate that went on. So that was quite difficult. It didn't turn out the way I'd expected. The people who I photographed, only one really had a Brexit theme, and he happened to be the ex-UKIP leader. So perhaps it wasn't surprising. I love the process. I love meeting people. I love the idea of standing on the shoulder of giants, and it helped me gather my thoughts. And there's a webpage there where you can see more. So that's me.
Very good.
Thank you.
So, Mark, do I talk to Rob now?
No, let's go through our introductions and we can have a discussion.
All right.
So Jola's next.
Thank you. I can't see my presentation, but you can see it, so I'm sure it'll work. I'm Jola. I'm from Germany originally, and I moved to Belfast about 4 years ago. And basically, immediately when I moved here, I started photographing Belfast as a city. And the project that I chose for my master's is called Homebird. And for that project, I've moved from photographing the cityscape to portraying people to try and get an insight to Belfast's emotional landscape. I think for the time that I arrived here, it was kind of special talking about Brexit, trying to redefine the island's identity and kind of trying to figure out where we belong politically, mirrored for me as well, trying to find out where I belong. So the theme of my work is basically home. I'm trying to explore Belfast as my home through the people who live here and who've given me this incredible insight. The key to my work has been the connection to my collaborators right from the start. And if Donovan flicks through these, you can just see some of the portraits I've taken. They all come with a story. The story is recorded. I had a little Zoom recorder that I took around with me. And if you look at the exhibition or at the book, each portrait will come with a little quote from that bigger story. And you can either read the full transcript or listen to the recording. Yes. So basically what I asked people was, the starting point was always, what makes Belfast home for you? And what I found throughout those 2 years was actually quite incredible. If you ask someone a question that is so limited to what is home, they suddenly start to open up and tell you all these incredible kind of anecdotes that are connected to a place. So the portrait I got of Belfast through all these people it's incredibly personal, and it's also very diverse, and that's sort of the beauty for me in it. It didn't matter whether it was in North Belfast or in East Belfast, everyone was equally open with me, and all the stories were sort of equally touching and personal, and it was just, for me, it was incredibly rich to be sort of given that gift as an outsider, which I think at the end of the day may have even sort of enabled me to move through Belfast so fluently and just gain the trust and be there to listen and to record what I've been gifted with. And I think some of the connections have been, Karen was the first one. There was a portrait of her in there, yes, her with the kids. She was the first one I worked with, and I approached her right at the start of the Masters when I didn't really know what it was that I was doing. She was unpacking her car with the shopping, and I just walked up to her completely nervous, being like, oh, I'm trying to make this project, could I maybe speak to you? And throughout the 2 years, I'm at the point now where her little boy asked me if I can stay over for a movie and a sleepover party. So it's been really rich for me for living here, and I've sort of, I think through the project, managed to make Belfast my home as well. So yeah, I'm really happy I get to share this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I didn't include as many images as maybe others. I'm hoping that you come and check out the show or view it on the website or see it in a publication shortly. My name is Iryna. This is my project Magic Hour. And Magic Hour really started off as documenting suburban environments with my project Common or Garden, where I was looking at how the front garden acts like a buffer zone between the private and the public, and I was really interested in how we, as a society, as people, as a state, arrange our environments. So I was more interested, and you could see it in my photographs, they were more straight, looking directly at something, documenting, without really being involved in what it is that I photograph. So with this project, Magic Hour, I started to integrate myself into the landscape. And if we look at landscape images and landscape photography, really the definition of it is either a scenery to look at from above usually, or a picture representing natural scenery. And you can't really say that my photographs are landscape pictures. So I was kind of, through play and through objects that I took from the home, I was playfully subverting this image of what it is that makes a landscape picture and how we can engage with it and how we can challenge our habits of seeing. Thank you. And what I found was that that the objects that I brought out were kind of performing for the camera. The household objects that I could find in the house, they were performing for the camera, and they changed the landscape from being uneventful, from being nowhere really that is grand or scenic, to enabled me to create something otherworldly, something magical perhaps, and to engage with the photograph and with the landscapes in my own personal way. Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Perfect.
Right.
So my project is called Portraits of Saying Goodbye, and it is behind me on the wall actually. And Portraits of Saying Goodbye is kind of made from a ritual, my own invented ritual, and that really is what my practice is this particular ritual that is kind of born out of the way that I engage with the world. I was speaking to some friends this weekend about this actually, and realized that this little story, a lot of kids were really interested in reading or games or any sort of recreation, and I wanted to meet people. I followed our electrician Hal and our painter Al. I would just sit on a bucket next to them and watch what they were doing all day. And my mom hates when I tell this story because she thinks it makes them look bad. But if you go back, Donovan, please. My mom used to lose me all the time. She wouldn't know where I was and would find me on the porch of other people just asking them about life. And I learned how to mix concrete and was given a border collie and installed crown molding once. I was like a 7-year-old. But so that is really just always how I've engaged with the world. You can keep going. I haven't really ever grown out of that. To this day, that is really, I need that. That is how I understand the world. That's how I learn. That's how I feel a sense of belonging. And so for the last 10 years or so, and not for any reason other than where opportunity took me, I've moved every 2. And I have continued sort of that way of being. And so everywhere I've gone, I kind of gather a family. And you can go back 2 more slides, Donovan. That's perfect. When I'm with those people, though, there is kind of this sense of melancholy. I'm with people I care about, in moments I care about, and I can't stop thinking about how it will end eventually. The night will be over, the relationship will change, people will have to go home, and that is sort of a pervasive feeling. And I found, while we were researching for this project, I found there was a word for that in Japanese, mono no aware. And it's kind of like an awareness of the transience of things, an awareness that things will end. And with that, though, sort of a celebration that you got to be there, and sort of the impermanence adding beauty to the experience. You can move one forward. So when I take a picture, it's kind of a response to that. And this is what my practice has always been, is being with the people I care about and responding to that sort of feeling of melancholy by making a portrait or taking a picture of the moment. And that sort of adds meaning to those relationships for me. I grew up in a very conservative religion, and there's a lot of rituals that add meaning to life in that environment, and I've sort of kept that with me, where when I take a picture, it feels like a ritual. And I thought, well described in a Red Hot Chili Peppers song, and Anthony Kiedis says, "All I want is for you to be happy and take this moment and make you my family." Mm-hmm. And I got made fun of quite a bit for putting an Anthony Kiedis quote in my artist statement, but it fits. So the presentation is 48 portraits, and you can go back, Donovan, please. There are occasional diptychs like this, where it's kind of the moment before what would be a sort of a formal portrait, and then the portrait. And I think I was trying to sort of translate how well I knew these people and sort of the intimacy of my relationship with them. And you can move one forward. So I decided to do it as a projection, as you can see on the wall here, because I didn't want the viewer to be able to choose how long they saw a portrait. I wanted that transience to be reflected. And the transitions, they kind of, unless it's a diptych, it's a hard cut, but otherwise it's a slow fade out, where towards the end you can still sort of see the outline of the person, and they're slowly fading away. And I wanted to frame it because I wanted to sort of keep some of the aesthetics of a formal portrait, but I wanted it to maybe look like the family portrait your granny might have in her house. Mm-hmm. And because of this sort of like ritualistic nature, I liked the gold frame, kind of representative of what you might see a religious iconography in. I was at the framing shop and sort of trying to describe all of this, and the framer said, "Oh, Don at Framework said, you want inside of an Italian church." I said, "That, yes, exactly." So that's the finished product. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So I asked some questions now. Is that what happens? Okay. So, working with students, working with artists, photographers, is one of the beauties is, and I'm equal to it. So it's not like, is that you enter a process, and the truth is that you have actually nothing when you begin, but you think you've got everything, and somehow you have to work through this process where it becomes a real resolution. I'd love to hear from each of you what that process has been like for you. I think it's a useful conversation, and why don't we start there, and then we'll dip in and out. Should we? Iryna, how has it been? Because it was really interesting when we first talked, and one of the things I think, and also just when you were talking about your work, it's all about threshold. It's that sort of in between, and it's quite complicated. But how was the process? Sorry, just one more thing. Your development just accelerated and accelerated and accelerated and accelerated. That's what I observed. And where I feel right now, you're like going to go much faster. But I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Donovan. I remember how it started 2 years ago with me going to the end of the line of public transport, looking at where the destination that isn't a destination as such in a traditional way. And I came back with these pictures, and put them on the desk, and people just weren't very excited about them. They were very, they were very sad, grey, wet. Ireland. Nobody got as excited as me, because I was super excited of going to these places and see what's there and explore. And I suppose I then translated that sentiment to something that is exciting and something that brings joy, something that changes a rock to something else, something that changes a little stone to a little mountain peak by just me adding something to the picture. And I think the process was the biggest development that I've made, is that I was inserting myself into the pictures through these objects, and that was something I didn't do before. I was always interested in the other, how others arrange, how others live, what it says about them. And now I've started to, I suppose, trust my ideas, trust my creativity, trust that the objects that I find or that I see, that will translate into an image that brings people as much joy as it brings me when I first get this idea in my head, and that's very rewarding.
So you've kind of gone from internal to external, and you're confident in doing that.
Yeah,
And that's massive. It's a liberation.
it is. Yeah,
And also it accelerates the new development, the new ideas, the new direction. Yeah.
I think with the conversations with the class and with you, it's given me a lot of faith in myself and in what I can do, what I can achieve. Because I know all of us have sessions or photographs that we do, and just they don't turn out the way we want, and we get disappointed and upset. But knowing that there is a group of people that believes in you, that knows what your potential is, that it's very, very supportive. And at this point, I think I have a little bit of that faith and a bit of that inner strength in me that I can say that, yes, I can do great projects. And the process involves taking not so great pictures.
It's interesting, the word faith. You know, I'm not religious at all. I'm from a mixed marriage and had all troubles with that. You know, I'm not religious, but I do believe in faith, and photography has taught me that. Because when you walk out in the morning with a camera, you've got nothing, and you have to trust that something might happen, and be open to letting that happen. And I mean, I think that goes to art itself. You know, it's sort of a self-exposure in a controlled way. And I guess on that note, Mark, I mean, given that you come from a spiritual background, I mean, you know, how's your process been?
Yeah, that was never intentional, that there would be any sort of, that was sort of put to me in class, that people were like, there's something spiritual about what you're trying to do. And that wasn't an intentional thing. But my process was, you all remember, I started here doing the Holy Lands. I wanted to document the Holy Lands and the photographers that I was really interested in when I started this. And the Holy Lands is an interesting area in Belfast, a bunch of different populations of people that are packed in pretty close to each other. But the photographers I was interested in at the time were really just like strictly documentary, and I thought that that's what I wanted to do, but kept saying to the class, like, I need to feel like connected to the people I'm working with. And that is how I had always sort of taken pictures, but my background is not in photography, so I had used photography in this way and was going to apply it to a fine art practice. But and everyone kept saying, why do you need to feel connected? And I wasn't really sure. But when COVID happened, and the process turned, from being able to make a relationship, kind of what Jola was talking about with her people, it turned to, having to approach people from a distance on the street and take pictures on porches, and it just wasn't doing it for me. So I started documenting the people that I have, become close to in Northern Ireland. And just sort of abandon that geographic boundary of the Holy Lands. But in doing that, I realized that the thing, I started doing some research and found, Matthew Finn and Ann Golden and Chris Vereen and Tina Barney and the people who have, Sally Mann, made a career out of documenting their loved ones and people they're close to, as opposed to kind of more outside groups. And I realized that I could actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is much, much closer to what is fulfilling to me as a photographer. And it took really the 2 years for me to understand why that even mattered to me, But I think I kind of understand a little bit better what's fulfilling about photography now.
But do you get a sense of fulfillment in terms of your own self?
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely. We were finishing this project and kind of talking about how we wanted it to be resolved, like how we wanted it to show up on the wall and people to see it. And I realized it is resolved for me when I take the picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The point is the ritual.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, because your process was all, you knew exactly from the beginning what, but you didn't have the access, I guess, to people. But then you created a community through your photography, which is kind of that's the way I see the process.
Or just realized that I could document the community I had.
Yeah.
Instead of having to.
Yeah. Exactly.
But, the thing is done for me when I've had the moment with that person. When I've taken the portrait, that's it realized. And then this is a product that I'm excited to show people, but it's not the end goal.
Yeah.
The end goal happens.
And it's interesting that, you had, and I know in your sequence, there's one image, and I remember saying to you, I said, that reminds me of an image I know. And it was an Ann Golden image, and they're having a picnic or something. And it reminds me, and the thing is, what's interesting, Ann Golden first showed Ballad of Sexual Dependency as a slideshow. She didn't show it as a physical, show. And so it was a really interesting kind of interconnection there.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a transience to it, And it's interesting with photography, which is such a sort of, it's a physical thing in terms of print, and yet, you're working with it in a much more, you began working with it in a much more kind of transient space,
My introduction to photography was, self-taught, just as something I was enjoying, and so kind of created a way of doing it that I didn't realize could be a practice.
Yeah.
But then kind of my process led me to realize that it was okay to keep doing as an artist.
Yeah. It's all about being yourself. I mean, Rob, you've been amazing in the way that your development has been fascinating. Largely through methodology, I think, more than concept. Your concept was always, right, solid from the beginning, and your context was, solid from the beginning. But the methodology, that was, I think, the big process for you. But what do you think?
Yes, theory was quite important to me, particularly re-engaging with ideas I learned at university in the 1980s, and rereading a lot of that stuff, and then trying to think about how I could apply it or illustrate it using photography was very, very interesting. And it ended up being quite a cathartic process for me, which was a bit of a surprise. So it was a sort of...
Well, it should be partly cathartic.
Well,
it always should be.
The 40 people I photographed, actually arranging the photographs, Henry Bolton took about 2 months to arrange. Paul Boutin, similar time. And I wrote to him in the House of Lords and just said, could I take a photograph of you? And he didn't reply. And then he replied with just yes, something like that.
Yeah.
And then I would suggest locations, and he would literally write back, no, not there. He was very precious about something. But then when I met him, it was just a joy. It was really, really nice. So for me, that process of meeting, everybody I was with for maybe 2 hours, and had quite in-depth conversations with them. And that was, for me, that was really, really good. It was really, really important.
But also, but you found a resolution through the newspaper, and which completely fitted to, you know, your because the portraits, they were like one element, and then suddenly we just realized we could mix this up.
Yes. Well, I mean, I have problems with style. I don't think I have a style.
That's cool.
I don't hold photographs with the reverence that perhaps other people do. I do see them, you know, I have 11,000 on my Instagram.
Yeah. No, but that's great.
I see them as transient things, or just part of a process. I think they're part of a relationship in the sense either with you, with the environment, you or whatever, or you and your partner, or you and your friends. It's a transactional thing. And so for me, being able to, and I mean, I did the photo diary. I've done that for 11 years. Photo every day. So being able to include that within the project actually was a bit of a joy. So from this, it became an archival process.
Yeah.
Just looking back at my archives.
Yeah.
And then it became a file issue. How good I was at keeping my files.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we probably pushed you a bit hard, but I think, you know, I was always concerned about how is this going to become a resolution, and then suddenly it all just really
a number of things
came together.
I think the difficulty for me was, you know, what was the difference between an image I like and an image that would illustrate what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Also, an image that actually would have an impact on other people. I mean, Paul Boutin, you know, he made me do stuff. I mean, he made me volunteer for the anti-apartheid movement for years. You know, he was a big influence on me. And then I suddenly realised actually nobody knew who he was. So actually, you know, my whole thing about, you know, I've just taken this photograph of this great guy, and it was lost. I mean,
but
I'm good.
I just love the way that the resolution kind of came to a kind of stream of consciousness, but at the same time completely sort of objectified in terms of dates, in terms of time, place.
Time and place was important to me.
Yeah, great. Speaking of time and place, Jolene, I mean, you've been photographing Belfast in an intimate way that I don't think I've ever seen anybody ever done before. I mean, I've said this to you and I've said it to the group, but your work is a gift to this city. It's a gift. Do you want to tell us about how the process was?
Thank you, Donovan. I think the process for me was really tricky to get started. I don't come from a fine art background. I studied graphic design, so everything for me sort of needs to have a purpose, and I struggled finding my way into the fine art world where it was allowed to be about yourself. So I think what I managed to do is something that had a purpose and was also for me. I remember sitting in class with Claire in the first semester, and I knew I wanted to make work about Belfast because the way people spoke about the place I was trying to make home just didn't fit. I was telling, obviously my parents knew where I was, and then they got like their friends commenting, being like, "Oh, is she okay there? How does she like it?" And there was always this negative connotation. And having walked around Belfast before trying to take pictures of the cityscape, I had people from here, taxi drivers, pulling up next to me, being like, "Are you lost? Are you okay?" Like, I'm perfectly fine. But everyone I actually engaged with, everyone I actually spent some time with, and I opened up to, was super, super nice and caring and friendly and incredibly welcoming. So sitting there with Claire discussing how these connections can actually lead into a body of work, how much connection is too much connection, where sort of the photography finds its way into these connections to actually make work. That was the start for me, and I had to learn using about 3 different cameras on the way to manage to translate these connections I had with the people into the portraits as well. At the start I was, I think, struggling with the language, struggling with where I was, struggling to actually be present in the moment.
I remember weren't you trying to photograph each street in the city at the beginning?
Yeah.
And for me that was just amazing I understand maybe where you were coming from. You wanted to see all of Belfast, to represent all of it. But it was fascinating how you then went from the geography and the street to individual people and how the people make the place rather than the streets making the cities. And that was really, really interesting to me.
I think that was kind of the commitment. So I photographed all the streets before I moved here for the masters. I did one semester for my BA here, and then came over and stayed with someone who had to work. And whenever he wasn't work, I was in Belfast with nothing to do, so I started walking and taking pictures. And then starting the masters was kind of the commitment to actually understanding where I was and engaging rather than just being another observer. I think there's a lot of photography about Belfast that doesn't take that next step to actually gain an insight. There's a lot of sort of outside perspectives reflected onto the cityscape. So this project really quickly for me became something where I could bring the listening part and the being there and the wanting to know bit, but what it is actually is this like multi-vocal portrait that I gathered through the people I work with. So it's become from my own longing to have a connection to a body of work that actually just empowers people to voice their own connection to Belfast. And I think that's why it, for me, fulfilled that purpose of giving something back. And if you look at the resolution of the work that's in the hallway there, I think for me the moment where I was happy or what sort of made it was the opening night of the show, where I suddenly had Karen with the little kids in here, and then Big Joe and Charlie from the garage at the other side of Belfast, and they got on, they had a blast, they were just having all the banter and getting drunk together, and that was kind of, that's the rewarding bit for me.
Yeah, I mean, you really found the subject, which was the city, the people of the city. But what I love about the work is when you look at it, if you're from Russia or America or China, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you look at the work, it's actually work about empathy. You know, it's about empathy and connection, and that's the contribution you've brought, and that's your strength. I mean, that is, you know, that is really so powerful, yeah.
I think the empathy is what I could bring, but the connection is definitely something the people I worked with have enabled me to build. It wouldn't work. People from Belfast wouldn't be so incredibly welcoming and open.
But it's a universal idea, no matter the place, you know. Empathy, connection, you know, it's such a human response and generosity, and no, the work for me is a gift to the city, and thank God, you know, we can look at ourselves in a way that we're not judged, you know, we can see ourselves in all our openness, you know. So thank you very much.
Can I ask a question, Jola? Actually, sort of a question to everybody. I think you were talking about it being fulfilling, like a need to give back in some way, and like seeing people interact with it on the opening night, how that was a fulfilling thing for you. I had sort of an issue. For the writing we were doing, I interviewed Matthew Finn, who has to take a picture of his family, and he was talking about how he feels like photography is selfish. It's a selfish medium, and I had kind of a struggle while making this project because I was asking other people for things to benefit me. The ritual I talk about to kind of commemorate our relationship was for me. And if they wanted a picture of themselves, they got it, but in a lot of cases they did not. Like what? I found that there was kind of an interesting tension between doing it for myself and finding a way to be generous and give back. I was wondering if you guys felt that, if you felt like it was more for you or...
Well, it's both.
Yeah.
It's
but
both.
In what ways? What ways was it for you, and what did it do for you, and what did it also give back, I suppose?
It has to be both.
I found it very difficult. That was the thing actually that surprised me the most, was actually the relationship I had with people. I felt the obligation to either have a nice image or not to speak badly of people, or to provide a print for them, or to inform them what was going on and how I was using it. And actually, 40 people ends up, we had lots of emails, there's a lot of communication between me and them. And I think I put it on Facebook, and some of them have become Facebook friends. And of course, they were very quick to comment on the text that I had attributed to them. I didn't say that, it actually wasn't as bad as that. But somebody said they were London Irish rather than Irish. And for them, that was really important. I mean, that had slipped my attention, as it were. So that also the other thing about sharing it with people, because actually you get back something slightly better. But for me, it was actually my project, and I had to get over this responsibility towards the people I photographed. And they all knew the contract, if you like. They knew that I was taking a picture of them for my masters, and then at the end of the day I had to go to bed with that thought, and otherwise I would have been quite, I would have found it really difficult.
But Mark, I bang on about this all the time. When you accept your context, it will lead to a concept, and the concept will transcend the context, and that's the journey that will lead to the methodology. And I struggle with this the whole time. Why am I making this work? Of what benefit is it to the world? Where's the usefulness? And I think the usefulness is in the concept. When I look at each of you, there is a concept there that you're sharing and you're communicating, and that's useful. And I think that's where photography, good photography, is really important. It's conceptually useful. It's useful. It's offering a thought, an idea, a contribution, a record. But it's useful. But it's great to question it and constantly question it. Sorry, do you want?
No, I just wanted to basically touch upon what both of you said. First of all, I think for me there's almost two layers of usefulness, which have translated in my resolution as well. There's the usefulness of trying to sort of amend Belfast representation in the wider context or in international context, which is probably where the concept shines through, where you've managed to represent something in a certain way, and that is useful in the broader sense. But for me, I can really relate to what Rob said on a very personal level of, is it useful for me or is it useful for the others? And I've worked so intensely with some of the people that I was literally in the position where I thought I needed someone to back me up, to talk about what I've been told. Like working with Ben, for example, and I have the 4 portraits of him on the wall, and he was pouring his heart out to me, and it's an incredible gift, it's incredibly touching, but I'm also not qualified to deal with trauma in that sense. So to always be aware that I'm making work, and to a certain extent it is my job, and to kind of keep the distance that is enough to protect me, but also find the empathy to engage, and to draw the line between this is something I've been given for this project, and this is something I've been given as the person who is here listening. I think that has been really special for me with the work. And now I have all these beautiful connections, and obviously it doesn't end because the master's is over, so I'm in the same position of less with emails, more with contact. I've been driving around, cycling around every week, visiting I don't know how many people. I've become part of their lives, which I'm incredibly thankful for, but I can't keep that up forever. So trying to find the balance between the professional and the personal is quite tricky for me.
But it will develop. It will also develop for you. It will evolve. Empathy, which is at the heart of your work, you'll find new ways of dealing with that idea, that approaching that idea. It may not be with people. It may be through nature. It may be it could be all sorts of things. The critical thing is that the reason your work works is because you can feel the empathy. You feel the empathy, and so it will. It's one of the hardest things is when you finish a piece of work. Scary thing. I remember when I finished the maze work, and I printed it in Stead, and I got on the train to Hanover, and I started crying, and because I thought, I don't know how it's over. I don't know what I'm going to do next. And one thing I've learned is what you do next is from what you've learned from what you've done before. And that's where evolution happens. That's where development happens. I finished a project a few months ago, and I was like, flip me, it's over. I'm done, and that's okay. But then I started questioning what I was doing in the last project, and it completely led to the new project. So it will evolve, and it will change shape. It will come in different forms. And for everybody,
I really hope that the thing that won't change is that we sort of have each other as a backup. I think no matter what we go on to, it's really important to have a team behind you, have someone to give you feedback, have someone to tell you that what you're doing is complete nonsense, or that this is great.
You can't work in isolation. It's not. It's impossible.
That we can, I think it's tricky for all of us to sort of now find the next step of what to do. We talked about this briefly before the start of being like, have you picked up a camera and have you done anything? Like Iryna says, she's just been sort of trying to get back in workloads and doesn't really know what to do next. I'm in the same position. I'm luckily not done.
But don't panic. Don't panic. I mean, that's one thing I always feel at the end. When you've completed something, it works. It's done, and then you're like, right, next. Yeah, you got to hold tight and don't panic, and it will come, but don't demand it. Reflect. I always think the best thing you can do at the end of something is reflect, and that way something else can open up. Reflect. Rob, what do you think?
At this precise moment, I'm a little anxious about the energy that involves in doing it, because it was quite surprisingly intense, actually.
Well, it should be.
Yeah, and it's actually now almost, if you do it the first time, you sort of naively do stuff, and you think, and afterwards you think, cool, that involved quite a lot. I mean, for me, the 40 portraitures over 5 weeks was so tiring. I mean, it was, I had to get to places. I often got there half an hour before just to work out where everything was and talking to people. And then the anxiety about whether the images came out. I mean, it was a real emotional journey in a way that, and I'd love to do it again. But I would. I mean, I'd love to do it again. And I'd love to be able to be in the position to throw yourself into it. For me, being able to say I was a master's student in photography was a helpful thing for me to say to people, and people were quite sympathetic. Yeah. I'm a little anxious now if I just said to people, well, I'm a budding photographer, and would you let me take a picture of you? So I think actually doing a master's was quite helpful. But I'd love to, and the lesson I learned was project-based stuff. Actually having actually being quite thoughtful about what you want to try and illustrate before you did it. I take your point about chances and things happening, happenings happening, which was again part of what I did. But I do think you have to pre-think it. You have to think where you want to get to, what you want to do, what is missing, what you need to add, how you make that happen, and it really work at it, and it has to be hard work. So
maybe what's different with my project that I don't photograph people, so I'm in a slightly different position, and for me it hardly ever works if I plan everything out. It hardly ever works if I think in the morning I will bring this object, I will go there and I will set it up this way. Usually in the end the image is very
But the concept
boring.
is the thing I think where you both unite in is that you're thinking conceptually. You don't know what necessarily is going to happen, photographically. You can, but you are thinking conceptually. That conversation's whizzing around in your head, and then you have to go out and see what happens, and or go in and see what happens, or whatever. But I mean, Rob, you're interesting because if you look at your resolution, actually it was a kind of, it's an embracement of vernacular. And vernacular is like, it just happens. It's not preconceived. It comes out, and in many ways you are vernacular. Well, actually, Martin Parr said this once, and he said it in R. This is a long time ago, and it was like a kind of statement, a speech, and he started shouting that all photography is vernacular.
Yeah.
And I was like thinking, he's bloody right. He's right. It is it's all vernacular.
But
Yeah, sorry.
But with certainly with my portraits I did, I very carefully, I chose deliberately the locations. So, Paul Boutang is in front of a Listener. For me that was an interesting.
But you keep talking about the portraits, but the truth is, the portraits are only a small element of the overall work. If you look at the whole thing, it's actually, it's a vernacular diaristic methodology. Where you're bringing in all these elements, and the portraits they're like anchors. Sorry, Mark, do you want to?
Going back to what
good
you're
question.
talking about with the next step. I took some pictures this weekend. I was just like, whoa. Take a break from this for a while. But I think we talked about this with guest speakers and with each other pretty often, that the next step after a project is...
Yeah, but the next step isn't just a project. The next step is the next step.
Yeah.
How are you going to wake up in the morning?
It's probably taking a little bit of time to reflect and not jump into something else is probably exactly right.
Well, it's a relationship. It is a relationship. You can't rebound. You have to start it all over again.
You have to grieve the project.
But it should be an evolution.
Yeah.
That's why I think reflection's critical. I mean, listen, I'm only telling you what I do.
Yeah.
This is not like science. What I do is I complete, get terrified, reflect, and then a little seed of an idea emerges, and then I trust it? And it, look, I've done so many projects where I thought this is genius, brilliant, and I get on a high, like forget drugs. I mean, I get on a high, like whoa, and then I realize it's shit, and it's like a stone falling from the sky. And you just crash and burn, and that's part of the process. You can't be afraid of it. That's life.
Yeah, I'm in the get terrified stage still. I finished the project, getting terrified. I'll start reflecting in a while, but just being terrified for the moment.
One thing I always really loved about you is you understand the experience of making work. You really understand that. We all understand that, but you particularly understand that. And because the truth is, when I go into a museum and if I see one of my pictures in a museum, I don't see it as mine. The only thing I see is I remember the experience of what I saw. I've often said, I think I've said it to you all, I don't take pictures. They're given to me. I swear to God, you don't, it comes to you. Yeah. And so when it comes to, the end of a publication or an exhibition, it's like a wake for me. It's not, it's like death. I don't enjoy it. I don't even want to see my work on the wall. Well, I do. There's a production level that I'm interested in, but the moment is the experience of seeing something. Like you feel like it's visceral. Yeah. You're in a crazy. Something happens, and then and you can't sort of capture it, and then you move into production and you kind of make it sort of presentable. And yeah, that's the beauty of photography. You know? It's simple but it's hard.
Was there any questions from audience members? If there's anything you guys would like to know?
Well, I was just thinking of it from an audience perspective as well. You know, I know that it's been kind of very difficult for everybody, but I've been involved in organising seminars and conferences, and moving online. We're just getting people from all around the world attending, whereas before it would have been like 30, 40 people in Dublin who could make it for a day, but opening it up and having the recording this session here, making it available to anybody who wants to see it, really.
Yeah, it's recording's interesting that you say recording. I've been teaching at Ulster for 10 years. We have never recorded so systematically. Never. Like, everything is recorded, and it's great. I mean, it's the lectures are recorded, everything's recorded.
That's where I work as well. So
yeah.
It has it's changed things. I know it's been a terrible situation for so many people, but
but there's some
good things coming.
Some good things came out of it, and I think there's going to be a while to process all of that and figure it out. And I mean, I don't know what the school policy is yet because it's a government issue, but I would prefer an integrated blending return, not an immediate campus return, because I think it's going to be an assault. I think we need to kind of break back in and step by step, as we had to break out step by step, and we've now learned how to, I've gone through 2 computers because it's on the whole time. I've learned how to do it, but I think you need to gradually move back to normality. I don't think you can just throw it in. I think that'll be difficult, as much as we want it. But I think it can integrate quickly, like 2 months, 3 months. But just to go suddenly back, I think would be confusing.
There might be a photo project in that.
Well, there is, transition.
Unless you have more of a question. No. Okay, perfect.
Just on that, I was kind of thinking about how 2 of you mentioned Brexit in your, I think yourself mentioned Brexit in the kind of preamble to your presentation, and it's funny, Brexit, it doesn't figure so much in our year. And also COVID isn't mentioned anywhere, and COVID isn't mentioned anywhere in our year, and I'm kind of wondering, like, those huge, all-encompassing topics, are they too big? Like, did many people in your year tackle those things, or is it just inherent in the work that, no matter what topic you pick, those things are there, or did people purposely shy away from these big topics and look for smaller things, or how were those big topics dealt with?
Well, Rob didn't. Rob didn't shy away from those big topics.
No, but
I suppose I was quite keen to move away from talking about myself, but ended up talking about myself, because that was the only way in photography I feel that you can express it. That sounds a bit odd, but I mean, in literature, you can write in the third person. You can pretend to be somebody else. In photography, you can't so much. I think if you want to say something meaningful, you can't pretend to be somebody else. So I was quite keen to explore Brexit as a populist movement. I was hoping people would, shout and scream with Union Jacks or English flags and stuff. But then you end up it just being cliched and stuff. So finding a unique angle to it. And then I found I was, my professor who I referred to, Ernesto Leclau, talks about populism involving an antagonism. And then I went down this route of subversive affirmation as whether I could sort of rub people's noses in it, if you like, as a method. And then I suddenly realised, actually, the antagonism, I felt the antagonism. So for some people, I am the antagonism. So therefore, actually, my project, my World Grubs, is me rubbing me in their nose because I am the antagonism. So you end up in all these sort of funny places, and you can't. There's no way of expressing Brexit as a populist movement in any other way. Particularly if you only have metaphor as your device. And that, I think, is the shortcoming of photography. It's so reliant on metaphor, I think. And
but I think one thing that everyone is doing is responding to the time that they're living in.
Yes.
You know, that you know, and you know, Brexit is simply a context, it's not a subject. And it's how you respond to the time that you live in. And as Rob was saying, I mean, his work is more about antagonism than it is about Brexit. You know, so, you know, we push hard on that, where you take the context and take it to a concept, you know. So context is always critical, you know, it's always, you have to understand the context. You don't have to make it about the context, you know. As a group, you know, we're intimate. You know, you'll know, I've always said to everyone, look, we're going to talk about our own shit, but that doesn't mean you have to talk to the world about it. But at least if you know where you're at, then we can take it somewhere. And that's what you do as a group. You share your intimacy and trust, and allow that to move into ideas, but you don't have to you know, tell anyone. I mean, I'm open, you know, I make work about, you know, military architectures, because, you know, they look lonely and they you know, and they have force around them. So, you know, I identify with those structures, but I don't need to tell everyone that I'm like lonely or whatever. but I do identify with those subjects because there's a I identify with it emotionally, and you have to allow that to, and I think that's where the group, forgetting, you know, staff, where the group really thrives, is that you have that relationship with each other.
I think, Donovan, what we all have in common, or had in common throughout the course, was that we were all more or less self-involved in our work, and anything that has an impact on you or on your life, such as, let's say, Brexit, discussions around you, all these things find their way into your work. So even if in your year there's not that one big project about COVID and not that one big project about Brexit, I think if you ask a bit closer where people kind of got the initiation to do what they're doing, you might find there is a lot of it that has sort of tackled them rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and responded to the time you're in. You know.
Just something I observed. I like to go to BA shows in Dublin to see what their ideas are, and in their graduate shows you'd often see waves of themes. What I found so special about our year, that we did our thing. We each had a very personal angle on a subject matter, and it was wonderful. It's so refreshing to see all the variety, rather than coming to a show where everybody's doing what is maybe on a more communal level rather than their personal level. Yeah, so that was great.
As a group show, it's amazing how totally different every wall is. It's really commendable how there's no cliches or no themes as such. It's great.
I think that is kind of an interesting point. Like, there maybe wasn't things addressing those big topics, but like Jola and mine's work, which is, you know, very people-centered, like all the pictures are outside, and that worked with my context, but maybe outside of COVID, we would have done that differently, you know?
I would have photographed in homes.
Yeah, you know. And would I be as close with some of my housemates and people in these images if COVID didn't happen? I don't know. So you can't really separate. My project isn't about that. but it is in a way a record of these 2 years. You know.
Yeah, no, it's a unique year group because of the context of the time that, you know, we've been living through, and, you know, the work is a response to that, and I think it's one of the strongest masters we've had, you know, so I'm very proud. Thank
you. Donna, unless there's anything else, I think we'll call it good there.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Aldens.